All right, committee will come back to order. Everybody had a good lunch. We are at our 1 p.m. 2:14, we're not bad, an hour and 14 late. First is Wyoming Promise. Senator Von Flatern, would you like to come up? Welcome.
It's strange to be on this side of the table. Okay.
Now you'll know what happens when a committee puts the boots to you.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, my name is Michael Von Flatern, and this is Kenny Chestek, which is right beside me, and we are Wyoming Promise. I would like to thank the committee and the chairmans for this inviting Mr. Chestek and me to this hearing summed up. If we sum up the Wyoming Promise is a thought that corporations are not people, and only people can tell their preferences in candidates. My personal hope is that you will see enough worth in our resolution to take it on as a committee resolution. We'll be the 23rd state to pass this resolution, but no matter what, and barring any objections from the chair, I will have Mr. Chestek explain to you, and I will make myself and Mr. Chestek available for questions. And the Gillette Council passed this resolution 7-0. So that tells you how much they have faith in this, 7-0. And thank you in advance for giving our time and all you can do for the state of Wyoming, Ms. Chesnek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Representative Von Flatern, for the introduction. I'll be brief. You've seen me before. I just want to review how we got here and why this is still, based on yesterday's newspaper, how this is still a very important issue in the state of Wyoming. As you recall, maybe 6 years ago, Wyoming Promise was formed by creating a petition drive to try and get on the ballot to have a resolution adopted by the voters to say that corporations are not people and money is not speech, and that the state of Wyoming, along with other states, would like to have Congress propose an amendment to the Constitution to allow both Congress, but also more importantly, state legislatures to enact meaningful campaign finance reform and not be threatened with overturning in the U.S. Supreme Court because of the Citizens United case. We got enough signatures that time to be on the ballot in any state that touches Wyoming, but because Wyoming has a much higher threshold, we didn't get on the ballot for here. And then we started proposing resolutions to this body through individual bills in 2019. And there's a version of the bill that was adopted in 2019 that has been distributed to the committee. It was passed by the House 37-20. And it failed by one vote in the Senate Corporations Committee. So we didn't get through the legislative session that year, but we're back again. And the Wyoming Association of Municipalities adopted a resolution, which is also before the committee. You can see it. It's a one-page resolution. It says essentially the same thing as the one that was passed by this body, by the House in 2019. Wyoming Promise is very much in favor of the WAM resolution. The WAM resolution has been adopted in Cheyenne, in Lander, in Laramie, and about 3 weeks ago in the city of Gillette by a vote of 7-0. And I want to thank Representative Von Flatern for his hard work in taking it to the Gillette City Council and getting a unanimous support in Gillette. We are hoping, and this is important because dark money is it's getting worse. The problem gets worse every year. If you looked at the Casper Star Tribune, I think it was yesterday, day before yesterday or yesterday, there was an article also in the Cowboy State Daily. There was a $50,000 donation to a super PAC that is supporting Harriet Hageman. The donation came from an LLC that nobody knows anything about. It was some kind of a special donation. The LLC has no apparent business other than to raise money to give to super PACs. And it's been challenged. The FEC, there's a complaint before the FEC now challenging that donation as it's a classic straw man donation. Give money to somebody else who gives it, and that way you can hide your donors. And that's a classic straw man. Under the current law, under Citizens United, it's probably legal to do that. And it shouldn't be. That kind of secrecy should never be allowed. The one thing that Citizens United did leave behind, it did say corporations can spend unlimited amount of money on electioneering expenses, but it also left intact prior the McCain-Feingold reporting requirements, so that those organizations do have to report who their donors are. And we found that those donors have found ways around this. So we are so by trying to overturn Citizens United, we're going for transparency. We want voters to know who is funding these attack ads. That's what these super PACs are good at. They're good at attack ads. That's why they want to be anonymous. They don't want to have their hands dirty by showing up as doing these attack ads. In order to overturn these kinds of LLCs, we need the constitutional amendment. 23 states have done this already. We would be the 24th state. The idea here is to get 38 states to say, we want this amendment. And then that means to Congress, and Congress would see that and say, okay, there's 38 states to ratify this amendment. We better propose it before they try some other way of getting this done. So that's why we're here. We're hoping it's an easy lift. The language is already drafted. One version, the 2019 version, has been adopted once by the House. And then the WHAM resolution is fantastic. That's a one-pager that has been adopted in local communities. And I would love to, we would ask for this committee to take this matter up as a committee bill for the general session coming up in 2023. And with that, I'll be quiet and stand for questions.
Questions, committee? Charlie? Okay. Yeah. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I must say I find this the whole thing's quite troubling. We're really starting to chip away at the First Amendment. And I really don't like the idea of corporations making political contributions. I thought our state law was quite good. I do like the idea of having to have people have to say that they're the ones contributing. So I like the reporting requirements. But I am concerned that I know there's a big push from the left to try to overturn Citizens United, and they have an advantage because so much of the media, both print and electronic, is dominated by the left, and they have been quite selective in their reporting on a bunch of national things, and we need to have a balance to that. So how do you, my question is, how do you, if you pass a constitutional amendment, how do you deal with the need to restore some kind of a balance in the information available to people by you selectively cut off some of the more conservative sources, and you haven't touched and shouldn't the free press, which is biased to the left in good part. How do you balance those things? I find this a difficult issue to deal with.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, Wyoming Promise is a nonpartisan organization. We have as many, probably more Republicans on our board than we do Democrats. It is not a left issue at all because the left does this too. In more recent elections, there's been more dark money spent in support of Democratic candidates than in support of Republican candidates. So it is not a partisan issue at all. I also don't think you could classify the Gillette City Council as a left-wing organization either, and they voted for the 7-0. The ultimate thing here is that all we're asking for is for Congress to propose an amendment, which then has to be ratified by the states. If we don't like the amendment that comes out of Congress, we can vote no on that, right? So we have a check. Also, if the amendment is ratified and added to the Constitution, all that does is it allows for regulations to be adopted by the state or by Congress, which again, you have another vote on what those actually say, and you can have the control over, make sure that they are in fact nonpartisan and do protect everybody. So you have several levels of checks on this. But if we don't do anything, the dark money problem is going to simply get worse. All we're really trying to do here is allow for people's voices to be heard. We are in favor of free speech. We want the voices of ordinary citizens who don't have $50,000 to give to Herod Hageman. We want the voices of ordinary citizens to be heard over the din of the dark money. So we are very much in favor of free speech for people.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is this basically about disclosure?
No, actually, it is partly about disclosure, but it's also about whether or not corporations are allowed to give money freely for electioneering communications. The key holding of Citizens United was that corporations are people too, and therefore they have the right to make political donations to the candidates of their choice through these independent expenditures, which is the way of hiding the money. But they can spend the money, they can do it, they're allowed to. And a regulation might be to not only to require disclosure, to limit the amounts of those kinds of disclosures. What the regulation looks like later on is up to the state legislatures to adopt.
Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would this add some clarity as to if maybe these corporations were of foreign origin or anything like that?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. There is, because we don't have clarity into where the money is coming from right now, it's very possible that foreign money is coming in through these LLCs and these other organizations that are unaccountable and are not reporting. So one thing we could do, it would be to require much more robust disclosure of foreign or ban foreign donations out completely. So yes, this would be a very direct way of addressing that problem.
Further questions? Looks like we got it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ogden. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Committee, what's your pleasure? Oh, yeah, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephen Klein on behalf of the Wyoming Liberty Group. I've testified before this committee for more than a decade on election law and particularly campaign finance issues. Some of you have been here for that entire time, some of you for some of that time. A few of you are brand new. So by introduction, I lived in Cheyenne working for Y Liberty full-time back from 2010 to 2015. I've since lived in Washington, D.C., where I have a nationwide free speech practice. I focus quite a bit on campaign finance law, not nearly as much as I used to. I do have an update today to discuss with this committee about one lawsuit relating to campaign finance, but I do want to at this time at least comment on Wyoming Promise and this effort here. I'm certainly taken aback that dark money is a red herring. We speak of campaign finance disclosure, and this is under Wyoming law and under federal law, we have what are called PACs, political committees. What they do is they either give money to candidates or they otherwise engage in strictly election speech, right? And they've been around for decades. And the idea was, well, what is a PAC, right? It's usually, particularly under federal law, it's an organization that has the major purpose of engaging in elections. Wyoming law doesn't even define what a PAC is. It's pretty much a voluntary system. And there's really been no reason to put that a definition into law because it generally works. PACs, like committees, candidate committees, which all of you have, I think, some of you may still be running just as candidates without a committee, but PACs behave exactly the same way that your committees do. They disclose all the money coming in and all the money going out, subject to a $100 threshold. We raised that a few years ago. Dark money is where this arises, the controversy arises, is that there are organizations that engage in a whole lot of political speech that is not directly election related. It's not the kind of speech that is vote for this person, vote against this person. But we've now delved into, in the last few years, Wyoming law, electioneering communications, this idea that we have certain ads being taken out that have the equivalent or the effect or the interpretation of going for or against a candidate. And this is a part of the lawsuit that we're ongoing. But I do say that there are a myriad organizations across the country that have not and never will disclose their donors, even though they engage in political speech that's going to somehow, down the road, 8 degrees of separation, affect an election. I try to avoid specific names here, but come on, the American Civil Liberties Union, great example. They're never going to disclose their donors, and I applaud that. I think that they're terrible on free speech. They've fallen so far from where they were in the 1970s, and I can judge what the merits of those positions. I don't have to know who their donors are. I don't really care. The same thing for Wyoming Liberty Group. I'll admit, 501c3. Here I am lobbying you guys on laws that affect elections. Does that mean we're suddenly a PAC or an organization that's going to disclose? No. So it's about that middle ground. That's been this debate for some time. Mr. Chestik's statement about the conduit contribution that was just made to the super PAC in question being probably legal is wrong. It's completely fundamentally wrong. The Campaign Legal Center is not filing complaints with the Federal Election Commission because something is legal. They know better. They're a nonprofit that, by the way, does not disclose their donors except for some major foundations that spend their time combing campaign finance reports to find things like this and report things to the FEC. They would very much like the FEC to not be a nonpartisan agency, to have some speech czar in there with Thor's hammer who can strike down anyone engaging in election malfeasance. I'm thankful that it hasn't come to that. But nevertheless, a conduit contribution, even though corporations and LLCs can now donate to super PACs, not directly to candidates, but to PACs that are engaging in election-related speech, even though they can do that, you cannot simply set up an LLC that doesn't do anything but sit there and use that to make a contribution to a PAC. I think that the FEC, despite its backlog, has enforced recently against complaints, settled complaints on this issue. And so it is also enforced against corporate funding, foreign corporations that are spending money in elections as well. It's not perfect, far from it, but it's far better than I think the alternatives here. I have serious concerns about this resolution because it really goes so far beyond the First Amendment. If corporations don't have speech rights, and that's all it is, corporations are not people. Well, all right, and they don't have rights. All right, let's take the Fourth Amendment. Any of you work for companies, is suddenly your office in your corporation, is that subject to search and seizure by the government anytime? Because corporations aren't people, we're searching the corporation, so we don't need a warrant. That's nonsense. The best rebuttal you can come up with is to say that, well, no, but it's still your desk. It's still, you have an extension. You're just using the corporation for the purpose of doing business. Well, what? That's the exact same thing as the First Amendment. It happens to be a business entity that's people, real people, be it a nonprofit, be it some gathering, are using to engage in the political process. There's nothing wrong with it. It's generally subject to disclosure already. It's stupid to go back and overturn Citizens United. Forgive me, stupid's a terse word there, bad word, but it's foolish to go and say that Citizens United, which all it did was ban a movie about Hillary Clinton. That's all it was about, using corporate funds, and it could be any corporation, a press outlet. That's all it did. It didn't say corporations are people. It just said no matter what form you're doing, the First Amendment does not permit the government, and this includes the Wyoming government through the 14th Amendment, to ban movies about political candidates. We don't do it. It's completely un-American. That's probably why Citizens United is never going to be overturned. So I found my soapbox here, but I'm on this issue. I have other things to discuss with this committee on election issues, but Mr. Chairman, I don't want to go beyond that until the committee's ready.
Question, Mr. Klein? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further testimony from the audience? Further testimony from the audience? Do we have anybody online, Jody? Public testimonies closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move also draft a joint resolution along the same lines of what was 19 LSO 286 that's before us today to discuss at our next committee meeting. And I'll certainly talk about it if I get a second.
Second, Roscoe. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I might have a question because I read through this and I have some of the same concerns Mr. Klein does on the language, but I just want to double check with Mr. Chestick, who also I should mention is currently running to be a member on this side of the desk. If this is the same language that the other 28 states have. So I'm getting a yes nod. And so while I may have a little bit of issues with some of the language, I do understand that the purpose of the resolution is to be mostly in compliance with every other resolution. They're similar enough to force Congress to act on the issue. So I'm
He's shaking his head back. Not sure what's right.
well, sure. So let me, Mr.
Welcome
Chairman,
back.
if I could ask if this is substantially the same language and it's written in such a way that it satisfies what other states in regards to their laws are doing a concerted effort. Would that be correct? That's why the language is how it is.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer, I don't believe this is the same language used in other states. I think every state has done their own. There's some specific language in ours, for example, that quotes the Wyoming Constitution as to why this is consistent with the Wyoming Constitution. So I don't believe our language is, we have looked at the other resolutions and there's some commonalities, but I think most states have different language.
Any questions? Further comments? Moved and seconded. Question called.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I have trouble with the resolved section on page 4. It says now therefore be it resolved by the members of the legislature of the state of Wyoming that the legislature of the state of Wyoming respectfully urges Congress of the United States to propose and send to the states for ratification an amendment to the United States Constitution consistent with the findings of this resolution, clarifying the distinction between the rights of natural persons and the rights of corporations and other legal entities, and providing that Congress and the state legislatures may regulate all monies raised and spent for political purposes. Mr. Chairman, the ambiguity of that gets right at me. It's like, why can't we have the actual language that we would approve in a constitutional amendment in our resolution? Because this is pretty open-ended. May regulate all monies raised and spent. A resolution clarifying what are we clarifying? So, I'm willing to support this to have more in-depth study, perhaps because it's of great importance to people. But this is way too vague to send away. Now, the witness was absolutely correct that if the Congress were to propose an amendment, it would have to be ratified by the states, passed by the Congress and ratified by the states. That's a huge check on this and a point where we could decline to ratify it. But I just feel a lot more comfortable if the actual language that was going to change our Constitution of the United States was included so that we could follow that.
Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to agree with Senator Case, but I do believe that if we were to move this forward, we would have time to do that in our next session. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Co-chairman.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also agree with what Senator Case is saying. But from what I understand, the purpose is, A, we're not necessarily dictating what that amendment should be. And similar to what, I mean, we've had 3 or 4 other types of resolution issues over the past decade. I got a couple emails on one of them this morning, actually. And the intent, and I think from what I heard, the intent is really, I mean, some people certainly think we need a constitutional amendment. From what I get from the testimony and what I understand about this kind of movement is it's really trying to force Congress to act. And a constitutional amendment may be a pretty strong step, and maybe that's what it would take to negate that Supreme Court ruling. But I guess I like that there's a middle ground that Congress could put in some parameters which may further be in line with the Constitution, which may not, necessitate a separate Supreme Court ruling or a constitutional amendment. And so I think that's why it's pretty open-ended. It's really just urging Congress to act and do something. And whether that's an amendment to us, it is, in my mind, a little premature for us to say, hey, this is exactly how we want the amendment to read. And I don't know if other states have put forth the exact language or not, but I don't believe they have. So while I appreciate, yes, it would be nice if it was more specific, I think it's really more of a call to action from the states to Congress saying, we need you to do something. And it's time to act. And I guess we trust Congress's best minds to come up with something they think would work. But I think that's a response.
Further comment. Question called. All in favor of getting the bill draft ready for the next meeting, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Division called. All the ayes, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Charlie. Case is an aye.
No.
I didn't see his hands, so no's then. Okay. I didn't get a count on the ayes. Did you get it, Jody? Let's do the ayes again. Raise your hands. What's that?
4, 5, 6, 7 errors left.
Okay, you got her. That'll make her. Very good. Redistrict review, we'll, what? I'll let you do that, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yeah, I'm not gonna talk about it.
All right, as much as I do. And so committee, this is just really, I think I put on the agenda in request from some legal minds. As I think, or I hope the committee is aware, there was an entity, I guess I can mention it, it's the Sheridan County Democratic Party, has publicly stated they disagree with the redistricting happenings of what we passed. And so it seems kind of weird, but apparently it's some type of ultimatum that they have called on us as this committee to look at redistricting and make it within deviation, or they believe it's in their purview to necessitate a lawsuit regarding the plan. So instead of just going and doing that, they have basically called on us to determine if we will look at our redistricting plan and try to get it within deviation And so that's why the issue is on the agenda this morning, to see if there was political will or support among the committee to go back and have Sheridan County look at the redistricting plan and put in deviation, or if there's not, we can put the ball back in their court. So that is why it's on the agenda. Would be happy to have anybody. I don't know if anybody's here to discuss it or would like to, but that is what they've asked me to put on the agenda to discuss if this committee wants to look at redistricting again in the interim in regards to deviation.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would certainly be in sympathy with their thoughts. I really don't think that it's our redistricting plan anymore. Certainly in the end, it wasn't this committee's plan. And I think several of the members of the committee didn't vote for it. So I believed we should have a plan in deviation. I still do. I wish them well in their lawsuit.
Comment. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just curious, what would the mechanics actually be? Because we took a final vote, it passed the session. I don't understand, other than we telling them, yes, we think it would be a good idea to have it in deviation, but even who would even redraw the plan, and then do they bring it back to us in the next session? I don't understand. If you could enlighten me on that, please.
Sure, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Go ahead.
The ask would be on this committee, and so like all states, the legislature, as long as we stay on the census numbers from 2000, we can put forth a new redistricting plan at any time. So the call would be on this committee to work on another redistricting plan for the legislature's approval to change up some districts, if this committee wanted to take on that endeavor. And it's in this committee's purview anytime, or management council specifically, to.
Special task force.
We certainly could have, if that's what this committee wanted, but.
Wrong committee, that's management council.
Well, for special task.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to complicate it further, it's an election year. So you would get elected and then it would change. So how does that work?
It would change until 2020.
Until your term?
Yeah. The next one.
And then the next session you would be, go to the new, okay.
Well, so.
Further comments? Anything further, anybody?
I'm not bringing the motion. I just wanted to make
All
sure we're aware.
Anybody want to comment from the audience? Where have I heard that before? All right, I think that takes us through all of our business, other than Representative Burt's got a non-agenda item, which.
And I have a question. If
Senator
it's-
Case, go ahead.
Yeah, it's, I was thinking the Secretary of State's office would be around because it was election issues. But there is an issue, I think, with respect to people trying to get absentee voter lists right now around the county. And there's been some direction issued by the Secretary of State, as I understand it. It used to be that you could, absentee ballots, by the way, go out, start returning, I think, tomorrow. Yeah. And it used to be that you could keep checking with your county clerks and they would tell you which ballots are returned, so that the candidates don't bother the people that have already turned their ballots. My understanding is that there's a hitch in that, and that counties are handling that differently. Some are handling it one way and some are handling it the other. So that's what I'm told. And I'm wondering if we might, I'd like to know why, and if there's anything this committee might be able to do to get it back to the old system, just with a letter or something.
Good catch. I've called on.
And I
it
think,
myself.
I'm not sure if anybody in the audience could talk about that, but that's what my understanding is, that its policies changed on that.
It has changed. I've contacted them.
Yeah.
You can get a hold of your clerks. Sorry for the.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if we could I mean, if we could kind of weigh in and say that.
I'm happy to, if you want to make a motion to that effect, because I'll support it. I'll
Okay.
second it, in fact.
Well, I would make a motion that we continue the practice. We encourage our clerks to continue the practice of releasing the names of people that have returned their ballots so that any candidates of any party, anybody that are working on the absentee voter list wouldn't have to resend stuff to them. And I think it'll save lots of resources. It'd be good for the planet.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Discussion. Any discussion, committee?
No,
Go, Chairman.
I would say I do believe that the new guidance is counties are all doing it differently now on who will publish. I mean, I think the information based on the county clerk, from what I understand, is the county clerk can or set a fee, et cetera, to release those names or tell campaigns who's already turned in their absentee ballots. But it does not seem to be a statewide accepted practice that's standardized. And so if the motion is to, I don't know if it's a draft a bill for standardized process, or right now it's just an encouragement. If I could get a clarification on if we're looking for a motion to have a like standard practice and statute.
No, I
Certainly-
think we're just looking for asking the clerks to consider having the same policy that would be, like it used to be, disclosing who has returned their ballots to save mailing costs and everything for all candidates.
Senator Case,
Yes, sir.
can we add the Secretary of
Yes,
State
we
into that?
can.
Because Secretary of State's who's actually been the one that's released. Clerks give it to them, and
That's
when
great.
I contacted them, they've changed policy. You can get a hold of clerks. But I'd like to see both of them say, look, we want to return to old practice.
I agree.
Okay.
It's very friendly.
That's friendly. That's what it would be.
Yeah.
Further comments, anybody? But, yeah, Senator Boner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That, sounds great, but I don't see any clerks or anybody from the Secretary of State here. I'm wondering if somebody might be able to voice why they made the change. Maybe there's a reason for it.
We're only sending a letter of recommendation. If they've got an AG opinion, which I've rumored there may be one.
Directed by their AG. From what I understand, Mr. Chairman, there was a directive from the AG's office. They did not have to provide certain information any longer.
Didn't have to.
And so from what I understand, they've chose at this time not to provide some of that information. And it did, I know people in the audience have been in contact, and the Secretary of State's office has sent them memos. And they did inquire if we needed to come to this meeting for election issues. And I did tell the Secretary of State's office, they would probably not, we wouldn't need them to attend this meeting because we wouldn't have that election issues.
Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I got to come back up and to be proper, I will. With that request, I just want to, I'd like to request that when we submit that to their office, that we request that they put back in the voter ID that they remove. I don't know why they removed that from there with the information that they sent out, but if we could request them to, put that back in there, I think that should be part of the information.
Senator Case, your motion.
I'm not
Friendly?
sure I understood it, but
So within the information that was removed from the Secretary of State's office that they push out, part of that is actual voter ID. Yeah, the written number, we put that within the request. If we get that put back in as well with the information that they don't have to, but they used to, if we go back to old practices, we'd like to see that back in as well.
Thank you for that. I think it's friendly, but if it's a deal stopper, I wouldn't, if it's possible to have that, but they may have a good reason for that. I'm not sure. But still the name and address we should be able to get. And we could do that without the voter ID, I would suspect. So that would be optional beneficial information. So I definitely would accept it as friendly, but it's not a must-have.
Perfect. Further comments, committee? Further comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Look at that. You almost got a unanimous vote, Senator. Not quite. Passed.
Charlie was not.
Senator Burt, you have the floor. And being you're not on the agenda, we'll keep it pretty tight, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, if you can indulge me, I apologize for not having a printed material. That was on my fault. I did send out an email about 10:30 this morning that this information will come from that I'll be working with. I should also have two in the offices that'll join me. One will be Andy Craig from the Cato Institute and Dr. John Krosnick from Stanford University. They will weigh in on, I have two topics. First one will be a ballot order bill that I'd like to propose, and then the second will be another topic, which we'll get after this one, so I don't get them confused. So I do want to say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present the topic. I do believe in our current political climate, there is a strong appetite for legislation that improves the fairness and integrity of our elections. The legislation I want to propose gives Wyoming the opportunity to help lead in the effort to improve our elections in a unified and equitable way. When I was fortunate enough to present this bill to the House Corporations Committee during the 2021 the general session, I was joined by the renowned experts on what was called the ballot order effect. And the ballot order effect is the electoral impact caused by the position of how your name appears on a ballot. Over 1,000 studies have been conducted on this phenomenon, and over 85% of those studies have shown in firm conclusions that a candidate's name appearing first on the ballot improves final results by anywhere between 2 and 10% of the vote. If the code is not secure enough, that it allows the opportunity to easily manipulate results. Now, to be clear, I don't want to put any doubt in the integrity of any of our county commissioners or any of our clerks. I'm just saying with the language that's currently written, it does have the opportunity that could. I don't want to actually make an accusation because I don't want to go that way. After reviewing the current Wyoming election code, it appears that we have 3 different statutes that actually are within conflict of one another. And so while the bill does address fairness and integrity of our elections, it also becomes a cleanup bill, giving clear directives to election officials and allowing them to conduct free and fair, secure elections. Now, Dr. John Krosnick from Stanford University, Dr. Josh Pasek from University of Michigan, and Dr. Darren Grant from Sam Houston State University testified during that previous committee and provided information and ample research that shows that inherent bias from ballot order. This morning, I emailed you all some of the information, including a letter written by Dr. Krosnick that testified that he's been called as an expert witness in several states in successful, costly lawsuits resulting in court-mandated changes to their election procedure. Their work concludes that much of like taking a multiple choice test, voters who are less informed or undecided with their choices will select the first option on the ballot, which skews election results. This proposed bill draft rotates the order in which names appear on the ballot to ensure that each candidate's name appears an equal number of times at each position within their race. This nullifies the impact of ballot order effect, and according to previous testimony by the County Clerks Association and the Secretary of State's office, thanks to uniform ballot machines in each county, this can logistically be accomplished at no increased cost, either at the state or the counties. This is a very practical fix that ensures election integrity and fairness and protects Wyoming from potentially costly lawsuit. When first introduced, this was a tripartisan piece of legislation. Legislators from all political ideologies signed on to this bill, to include 4 of our current committee members. With that, Mr. Chairman, and with your permission, I would like to introduce Dr. Krosnick, who will be able to testify to the finer details of how the ballot order effect can affect our election laws.
Thank you very much, Representative, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all. Can you all hear me okay? I do not know. Yes, excellent. Thank you. Let me apologize for wearing this shirt, short notice on joining you today, and I mean no disrespect by not putting on appropriate clothing. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you again. I enjoyed speaking to you on the last occasion, and I appreciate the privilege today. It's my mission in doing research as a political scientist and a psychologist at Stanford University to understand the factors that influence voters' decision-making. And overwhelmingly, voters make decisions based on substance. But we have also seen, as you've just heard from Representative Burt, that a very solid literature shows that having one's name listed first on every ballot gives a particular candidate an advantage in gaining votes. And a number of states, including Ohio, New Hampshire, and others, have adopted practices that rotate candidate name order across voters so that no particular candidate is listed first on all ballots. And that appears to be an effective system in eliminating any unfair advantage for a particular candidate. And the research, as you've heard, has been overwhelmingly consistent, more than 1,000 tests, more than 80% of those showing candidates listed first gaining votes. And in this era where margins of victory are getting narrower and narrower, that small nudges in one direction or another can make a difference and appear to have made a difference in some past elections. So I appreciate the fact that you're considering this and congratulate you on considering a step toward fairness in elections in Wyoming. And I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
Questions? Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So do we have any more testimony at all? Mr. Co-Chairman.
I'll make a motion unless there case.
I just have a bit of a question. I know they rotate now. No, they may rotate by precinct or what have you, but they are not uniformly one way or the other. And I wish the clerks were here to explain how that's done. Because I got a sample ballot. I'm running for election like a lot of people. And my name is listed at different places on that ballot by all the iterations of it. And I don't know if they're the same for an entire precinct, for example, or a voting district or what have you. And then but it does rotate. And I don't know if it's an equal rotation or anything like that, but I'd like to know more about that, especially from our clerks.
I actually have I don't think we should forward a bill draft this meeting. This just came this morning. I think we should bring the clerks in at the next meeting. We have 2 more meetings. And I don't want to pour cold water on you, but I think it's prudent to let everybody go through the materials, weigh it out, have clerks come knowing at the next meeting, and then we can go ahead and forward a bill draft. Is that a problem with you, Representative Burt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I do agree with that. Within the email I did send out, I did send so in the 2021 general session, I submitted a ballot or I submitted a bill. And within that, both the committee had an amendment, the committee of the whole, as well as the second reading, all had amendments. I took all those the way that they were passed through and I cleaned that up and rewrote the bill with all those changes into that. And that was off the direction of both the Secretary of State's office as well as the clerks. So I did submit that bill within the email of the draft that I would like to look at that. But I would like to explain how some of those, how the ballots are kind of set up and why I actually brought this, if that would indulge the committee.
You're good to go.
Thank you, sir. So the way that the rules are currently set up is it does say that the names have to be rotated within the different ballots. And when we look at 3 different statutes and how they conflict with each other is we have one particular statute that basically lays out how the ballots are set up within the particular rows and how the parties are set up. And then when you get into another statute, it breaks down that the ballots are set up within different parties. So me personally, when I had my race against a Democrat and I'm a Libertarian, those were the only 2 parties within the race. The precincts that I set on the top of the ticket in my ballots, I actually won those precincts. And then when my opponent, when he was at the top of the ticket, top of the ballot in his precincts, he won. Well, now when we look at the statutes and how they're written off, when you look at how the statutes currently state, it says that the political party that wins the congressional race in the preceding year, that party gets the top of the ticket. So now we get into certain aspects to where you have a party that wins a congressional race, they automatically get the top of the ticket regardless of how many precincts there are. Now with that, it also states that independents are automatically, no matter how many parties are in the race, are automatically at the bottom of the ballot. They'll never have a chance to be at the top of the ticket and they'll never have a chance to be at the middle of it. So when you look at how the ballot order is looked at, if you have those undecided when they walk into it, or the the uninformed because they just don't want to, they don't. There's a class of us that don't really like politics. They just go in, they vote, but they don't really follow politics a whole lot. So when they walk in and they want to get in, they want to vote, they get out, they look at who's at the top. Now, as an incumbent, I could very well be at the bottom of the ticket because of my opponent. If I have an independent decides to jump in, that independent will sit at the bottom below me. So when you look at, we continuously hear about how we want to influence an equal representation at the ballot box for all of our voters. And we actually want to look at as well as the parties that actually run for the constituency. And when you look at that, the purpose of the bill and the purpose of the proposed bill is to make sure that parties have an equal representation of their constituency when they go to the ballot. So if you're a Democrat, then you should have the ability to sit at the top of the ticket regardless of who wins the congressional seat for the previous year. And that's really where it comes into it, is our statutes don't allow that to happen because one statute overrides another. And then one party gets favor over another. And like I said, when Dr. Krosnick had mentioned, when your margin of error gets smaller and smaller, you look at that 2 to 10% is enough to win or lose a race. And third parties are disenfranchised this, and especially you said independents, when they go through the aspect of going through collecting all the signatures and the ballots, they do all that work, and then not to have the option to have the equal time at the top. That's where the intent of this bill is coming from, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman, my earlier comment, and I want to stand corrected here because I was thinking of the primary election. You know, I'm a Republican and I thought that's all that we have is these primary. But Mr. Chairman, so I do know that the candidates in my party's contest coming up, they are rotated. And I don't know how, but I made the assumption that would apply to the general election as well. And then, so it's just I was just referring to the primary election ballot. I didn't think of the general. So, you know, what we could do is just have the bill listed on our next meeting. Your bill, it sounds like a lot of thought went into it, and we don't just have it be on our next meeting.
I'm very happy with that. I just wanted to let enough notice. So if it's listed there, it's absolutely fine by me. Is that all right with the rest of the committee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just one more correction in your co-chair, Representative Zwanitzer, that would actually like this part, actually in the statute as well. It actually has a statute in there where names are listed alphabetically as well. So where I'm a B and our co-chair is a Z, then obviously I receive preferred treatment over that as well. So it's a way to make sure that we are actually addressing those. So everybody has equal access at the top, and really is a equality when it comes to the ballot. That's the intent of the purpose of the bill. So
You can make it where it's amendable so we can do the same on our voting in the House and Senate.
yes, sir.
Bill to be up, I think leadership can just ask for the bill to be there. I don't think we're not voting.
Sure.
It'll just go there, absent objection. So
Mr. Co-Chair, if we could also ask LSO at the same time with that bill draft to have on the agenda, if those 3 statutory references that Representative Burt identified that he believes conflicts, if we could have those just prepared and maybe LSO's comments about those conflicting or potentially conflicting statutes, that'd be great.
that work, Josh? Perfect. Thank you. Nice job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will work directly with LSO and as well as the county,
Very good.
county clerks as well.
Okay, as
Miss-
for the last order of this. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I do have one more. It should be fairly quick. It's just more of an introduction on this one. I have Andy Craig a staff writer with the Cato Institute will actually present this one, kind of his idea, and I didn't want to jump on him, but this will be more. This should actually help answer before I stepped over the question of how we're going to work on redistricting. So this is actually going to be a proportional representation or multi-member district type option that could solve our redistricting issues that we see every 10 years. So with your permission, I'd like to invite Andy Craig to join us, please.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Burt. So As was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of problems with the one man, one vote rulings in terms of how you draw your district lines. And Wyoming's just human geography in general makes it very difficult to draw equitable districts that are also rational, because you have to take a chunk of one town, you have to go over to the next county and grab a slice of another town in order to get these districts with equal populations, as the federal courts have ruled is required. But there is another way to do it, and the Wyoming Constitution actually envisions this, which is that you use whole counties as the units of representation in the House. So you would have multi-member districts. You would have, Fremont County might get 5 representatives, or however the math works on that. And so in the past, Wyoming had a county-based system. The federal court struck that down on the basis that it was too malapportioned. The deviation was too great for the smallest counties to have a whole representative to themselves. And it was in response to that ruling after the 1990 census that you adopted your current system of single-member districts that you have to redraw every 10 years. So the alternative, which the math does work out on, would be to have multi-member districts where your smaller counties, where necessary, would be combined with their neighbors into a combined district. So you might have, for example, the Bighorn Valley, all 3 of those counties together in a district, because they each get about 1 representative. This system would be a big step forward on kind of the national conversation that's happening about electoral reform and different options you may have heard out there, like ranked choice and that sort of thing. This is a slightly different idea, but it's one rooted in Wyoming's history and geography, and asserting your 10th Amendment right to structure the legislature as fits Wyoming best. You shouldn't have to divide counties if there's a way around it. I know in Wyoming, counties are important units politically, economically, socially. They're not just arbitrary lines on the map. They matter a lot. And it's through those communities that you were chosen by the people to come represent them in Cheyenne. And so having a system like this would fix a lot of those problems, and it would make it a lot easier for you every 10 years. The other aspect I'll touch on just very briefly, I know y'all have had a long day and are getting ready to adjourn, is that by using a system of proportional representation for these multi-member districts, that is probably necessary as a Voting Rights Act matter. Wyoming's only currently minority district is covering the Wind River Reservation in Fremont County. And so by having this kind of proportional representation, they would still be able to elect 1 and maybe even 2 representatives. You would also have just basic partisan fairness, because if you had a countywide system where it was a traditional plurality wins election, where you have all 5 seats up and you do it that way, there's a decent chance that in certain years you could end up with a 100% one-party legislature, which I think kind of would offend a lot of people's sense of fairness. No matter how lopsided Wyoming is, you do certainly have some other parties there that deserve to be represented. So that's why I was asked to review this proposal by Representative Burt. I've checked the math on the deviations. It would work. It would be within federal court limits, and it would bring you closer to in line with what the Wyoming Constitution intends and what it still says. And with that, I'll turn it back over, and I'm happy to answer any questions either here or if you want to follow up.
So Representative Burt, let me ask you a question. The ask of us is to have Andy's presentation at our next meeting, or is it information he can provide or you can provide to the committee? And then if we want to take it up, I highly doubt we're going to take up redistricting for a different process in this year. But if you'd like time at the next meeting, is that what you're basically requesting, for an actual proposal with some thought into it of what it could look like? I just want to know, I want to make sure I know what the request right here is.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, Co-Chair. At a very minimum, I think to open up the discussion, we do have the ability to write a draft on the proposal and where we're at. when we really got into this to keep the numbers low to make sure that we had a better representation per voter, per representative, we were looking at a fairly large number. We want to switch that down with, of course, where we're at now with the 62-31. So I guess I would ask the committee to at least entertain the idea to allow us to draft a bill and, of course, bring a little bit more details we can get out here today on what that proportional representation draft might look like.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Case.
Representative, have you actually tried to do a redistricting plan based on this thought?
President Burke.
And I guess I think it's going to be harder to do than you think. And I think it'll be harder to maintain deviation. That not every county is going to fit with a single, a fixed number, a numeral of representatives, and not every one that's less would have one next to it that could make up the difference. I think it sounds kind of good in theory. It really does. But I think when you try to look at districts that have 10,500 people or whatever it is, and you realize that for all Fremont County's could do with 4 probably. But then when you go to the next county that they can only do a half, but the next county's got a full amount. It's what we ran into when we were trying to do these numbers before. It sounds like it would work, and it would, except for the operational boundaries and where you're short and where you're long doesn't work out. It would become easier if we had more representatives. For example, in the extreme, if we had, instead of had one representative for 5,000 people, then that becomes easier. But unless we go to a really big house, it doesn't seem feasible to me. I'll just throw that out.
Sure, Representative Malcolm, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then I tried this with the proportional, and it's not so hard to figure out a proportional, but then you have a problem with voting. So if you give each county a proportional, like say Goshen County was like 3 1/4 or something, then you could figure out something that way. But then when it comes to the voting on the floor, that's where you have a problem, because Goshen County gets 3 1/4 votes. Well, versus, the next county, Niobrara, gets a 1/4 vote. Well, how is that really fair on the floor? Because we had this conversation. How is that really fair on the floor? Because Niobrara doesn't really get a full representation, and then so then they get ignored, and then so it really is a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult when you go to the actual voting part, and we've had that conversation pretty in depth.
So Representative Byrd and the committee can move further than I feel comfortable with if they want to, but how about if we say, if you if Mr. Craig would put together the proposal and the numbers and maybe the envisionment, we can certainly include it in our packet in August. And that way we'll have it as a discussion item to look through it. And if the committee at that time says, this is magical and maybe it'll grow legs, we can go with it. Is that okay to the committee, or do you want to go further? Representative McGuire.
Within deviation, we didn't consider it.
So the quick comment for those listening at home, where the proposal would need to be in deviation and
Yes.
workable. So if that works, committee, we will have LSO including the information in the packet, and even maybe put it as an agenda item, the sub tab to look at and review. And then if we get wild and crazy about something, we can certainly jump back into redistricting. I'm just not sure the will is there, but certainly.
Or fill the thread.
If you can bring something that we think is interesting, I think we'll appreciate seeing it. I'm just not sure anybody wants to go back to redistricting right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to say the work that Mr. Craig has actually worked on, to Senator Case's point, we've actually had a map draw for 74 House representatives. So we did go really big, and that was actually in work with our speaker that actually said we can make it happen on the House floor. We brought that back, thought 74 made it a little bit big, so we actually reworked it and got back down to a 62 member House. And we can definitely work those counties into it. And where you're looking at, your quarter vote with Niobrara County, stuff like that, those counties would actually be moved into an adjacent county that actually has kind of the same demographic and stuff like that. So they don't necessarily get their own vote, but that section of county, Sweetwater County, Carbon County would kind of merge. We would have 7 representatives for that particular area and stuff like that. So you're not going to really work on a county that doesn't represent one vote trying to get on the House floor. We work those together to kind of get those into more than one county. But your counties would not be split. It would still be a whole county just lumped in with another whole county, and you're not splitting counties.
Yeah,
If you get us a proposal and a map, and maybe even bring Mr. Craig to Wyoming, we will have an interesting, hopefully more advanced discussion on it when we can see something tangible and see if it's something the committee wants to go with, if that works.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
And
Senator
Mr. Chairman, if we recall, when we first started this, of course, Senator Scott was a lot of inspiration. He actually grouped counties together to get, as you recall, the way we kind of went down, that these counties put together, that would be 4 representatives. You remember how that worked? We had the regions. So there was an element of that thinking in our beginning as well. So I'd be happy to look at a proposal.
All right, thank you for being here today, Mr. Craig. Nice seeing you.
Thank
Thank you, Representative Burt. 2 for 2, good enough.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Anyone else in the audience want to talk about election issues? At your risk. Mr. Klein, welcome up. You did provide us a packet of information, I see. I assume that's what we're going to talk about. Go ahead, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephen Klein on behalf of Wyoming Liberty Group. This memorandum is just kind of a short update on 2 different lawsuits. It's long because I've included judicial opinions as attachments. I don't want to, in the name of transparency, hide what this memorandum is based on. Again, working productively with this committee over the years, I think in particular, something I really think is notable is that there's an independent party member and a minor party candidate on this panel on this committee. And that it's interesting that only a few years ago, owing to a lawsuit in 2014, this committee fixed the law to permit independent and minor party candidates to raise money before the primary. That used to actually be prohibited. I don't think that was a deliberate problem with the law, but it was a problem. I know that I'm sure both of those representatives can speak more to whether that benefited their campaigns. I'm sure it didn't hurt to be able to campaign prior to the primary, at least raise money to do so. That's kind of my point here, is getting ahead of, because that was an amendment maybe 2018, 2019, owing to a lawsuit that we sued and settled in 2014. So sometimes these laws end up being unconstitutional, unenforceable, and then they just sit there on the books. And I think in this kind of what I bring in this spirit. Now I want to be very clear that these 2 lawsuits are still pending. They're both on appeal. I do, having said that, the first one, Frank versus Buchanan, relating to the polling place buffer zone, it's likely that the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals is going to rule one way or the other between now and the legislative session. I think it would behoove the committee to at least get moving, maybe have this as a topic, because next committee meeting, Saratoga, after the primary, with the county clerk's input, Secretary of State's input, I think it's worth having this topic there to see where to go forward. And if certainly by, again, they maybe have an opinion by then from the 10th. I wouldn't bet on it, but I would certainly think that before the next session, this will happen. So the second one is Wyoming gun owners versus Buchanan. This one's on appeal. I don't think there's going to be oral argument at the 10th Circuit until probably January, February. So it's highly unlikely. You're not going to see an opinion on that case. And that is a fairly extensive cross appeal. And you can see here, Judge Skavdal's opinion in that matter is significantly longer than Judge Friedenthal's opinion in Frank versus Buchanan. So there's a lot to take in there. And I mean, if anything, it does drive home the complexity of the First Amendment, implicate, interaction with campaign finance law. This stuff is really tough. It has to be very, very precise when you're dealing with the kind of speech that independent groups that are not PACs as I spoke about earlier, organizations that do not have to disclose all of their donors. You have to be very precise as to what they will disclose as to their election activity. And that's kind of where Judge Scavdall agreed with us that the idea that disclosing any money coming in that relates to, which is in the current law, certain electioneering communications, that's vague. And it's just, and unfortunately, I'll say that the Attorney General's office kind of made some mistakes in their arguments by saying, well, if it's confusing, just disclose everything, which did not help their case. So that's where we're at there. I still believe the definition of an electioneering communication to begin with is a bit of a mess of a smorgasbord. Having said that, Judge Scavdall did uphold that. That's what we're cross appealing to the 10th Circuit. So there's a lot going on there. And again, I'm pretty pumped. We have a permanent injunction against the enforcement of the law, so I'm not too upset. It's not going to be going to do anything this election cycle. Having said that, I'm always happy to work with the committee in the direction of making it more speech friendly as opposed to more censorship by red tape. So again, thank you for your time. I know it's been a long 2 days for you all, and I sit for questions.
Any immediate question? Oh, welcome back. Any immediate questions? Perhaps if it's okay, Mr. Klein, LSO, if the Frank Grassfire lawsuit does get decided before our next meeting, if we could get a copy of that final judgment or order, and we could then review our laws in light of whichever way that decision goes. Well, I shouldn't say whichever way. If it doesn't go the way that our statutes would anticipate it going, we should review it in this committee. I have the chairman of judiciary. All right, if it is decided before the next committee meeting, if you throw it on our agenda to discuss any implications from that ruling, committee, I'm a little more hesitant to jump into the gun owners appeal. It's probably 6, 8, 9 months away. And I'm not sure there's anything this committee is going to do in regard to electioneering communication definition changes before that appeal goes through. But if anyone in the committee wants to push it or try to look at it before, I just hate to do stuff in the middle of pending lawsuits if they're not decided. So I'm just making sure no one else in the committee wants to move in a direction, but I'm not seeing any. So we might be seeing you every year for a while. Again, Mr. Klein, it's been a good 10 years. We'll do a couple more. That work?
Thank you very much.
Anyone else with election issues? Welcome Equality State Policy Center, Civics 307, joining us today. Nice to see you up in Hewlett. So I guess if there's nothing else to come before the committee, we should talk about our next meeting. There has been some concerns that we had not secured a meeting location in Saratoga. I did discuss with some other people who are going to be looking on our behalf in Saratoga over the weekend, who apparently will be there, including perhaps the high school gymnasium there. And so committee, just know, I think those meeting dates are firm. The Saratoga location, until we secure a location, I hate to say for sure we'll be in Saratoga, but we are diligently trying to secure meeting space. So,
Mr. Chairman, they have a great community center.
do they? Well, they do, but it's booked. That's the problem. 2 or 3 of the great locations in Saratoga we've normally met at are all, apparently somebody's getting married one of those days.
I think we should
So-
go to Pine Bluffs, Burns.
So we will
Southeast corner.
trust our co-chairman to work with LSO and secure a location. Anything else to come before the committee? LSO, anything?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
what are the dates of the Saratoga meeting?
Yeah, August 25th and 26th, Mr. Chairman.
All right, no one has anything else? Have a safe drive home. We'll see you here in a couple of months, right after the primary elections. So those of you running, certainly wish you well. I look forward to seeing you here in a couple of months.
Huge thank you to LSO for all your extra effort getting up here and all the work. So Josh, all of your crew, thank you.